The doors of the church slammed open so hard I felt the sound in my chest before I heard it. I remember thinking, in that stupid, disconnected way your brain works when something huge is happening, those doors are heavier than they look, because someone had just thrown them open like they weighed nothing. And there he was. 5 years. 5 years, and I still knew the shape of him in the doorway before I even saw his face. My veil was down, my hand was in Garrett's, and every single person I had ever known in my life turned around in their seats to look at the man standing in the back of that church, holding the hand of a 5-year-old boy who had his exact eyes. I want to ask you 3 things before we go any further, because I've asked myself these same 3 questions every day since. What does a man do when he spends 5 years searching for a woman who doesn't even know his real name? What happens when the boy standing beside him has the exact same eyes as the man who held his hand? And what happens when I do turns into I can't, right in front of everyone you've ever known? I didn't have answers then. I'm not sure I fully have them now, but I can tell you how we got there. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. It started 5 years earlier, on the best day of my life. I graduated on a Thursday. I remember because it felt like the wrong day for something that big to happen. Thursdays are for laundry and grocery runs, not for the moment your whole life is supposed to click into place. I had $11 in my checking account, a diploma with my name spelled almost right, and a plan that consisted entirely of one word: finally. Finally, I'd get to draw for a living, instead of sneaking sketches into the margins of textbooks. Finally, I'd get out from under the version of myself that everyone back home expected me to become. My friends dragged me to this bar near campus that night. Nothing fancy. Sticky floors, a jukebox that only half worked, a bartender who'd seen every kind of celebration and every kind of heartbreak come through that door 100 times each. It happened to share a wall with this 5-star hotel, which felt like a joke at the time. Us, in our thrift store dresses, propped up against a wall that had a chandelier on the other side of it. That's where I met him. He was sitting alone at the end of the bar, in a suit that fit him like it had been sewn onto him that morning, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. I didn't know yet that he actually would have rather been anywhere else, that upstairs, on the other side of that wall, his family was hosting a dinner he'd walked out of 20 minutes earlier. He didn't tell me his last name. I didn't ask. That's important. I need you to understand that neither of us was performing for the other that night. I had no idea who he was. I just thought he had sad eyes for someone in such an expensive jacket. We talked for 2 hours before either of us admitted we were both terrified of turning into the people our families expected us to be. He said something to me that I still think about, that everyone in his life had a plan for who he should become, and not one of those plans had ever asked him what he wanted. I told him about my mother, about the town I grew up in, about how finally was the only word I had for what I wanted my life to feel like from now on. He made me laugh so hard I nearly fell off the bar stool. I made him laugh in a way that looked like it surprised him, like it had been a while. I'm not going to walk you through everything that happened next, because some things are mine to keep. What I'll tell you is this: it wasn't reckless the way people assume. It felt like the first time in my whole life someone looked at me and saw exactly who I was, not who I was supposed to become. He was gentle. He was funny, even then. There was nothing cold about him, nothing calculated. If you'd told me that night he was one of the wealthiest men in the country, I would have laughed at you and asked what he was actually drinking. I woke up first. Sun was already coming through those heavy hotel curtains, and I had a bus to catch back to my hometown in 90 minutes. I panicked, not because of what had happened, but because I suddenly realized I didn't know his last name, I didn't have his number, and some very loud, very scared part of me decided that was easier than admitting I might have wanted to. So I got dressed as quietly as I could. I looked at him sleeping for longer than I'll ever admit to anyone, and I left. I told myself it was a graduation night story, one I'd tell at parties someday, half true, edges sanded down. I had no idea I was walking out on the father of my son. 6 weeks later, back in my hometown, in a gas station bathroom, because I couldn't wait until I got home, I found out I was pregnant. I sat on the edge of that bathtub for a long time that night. I want to be honest with you, it wasn't some movie moment where I put my hand on my stomach and smiled through tears. I was scared. I did the math on my bank account 4 different times like it would change. But somewhere in there, underneath the fear, there was something that felt almost like certainty. I was keeping this baby, not because I was noble, because he was already mine. I didn't know how to find his father. I didn't even know his first name for certain. He'd introduced himself with a nickname that night, something I later found out barely anyone used. No last name. No hometown, just a hotel, a jukebox, and a man with sad eyes. I didn't know this part until years later, but I'll tell it to you now, because it matters. He woke up alone that morning and didn't panic, not at first. He assumed I'd left a number, a note, something. When there was nothing, he told me later, something in him went quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet in years. He didn't know my last name either. He knew I went to a school 2 towns over. He knew I loved a candy I mentioned once, offhand, 20 minutes into our conversation. That was it. That was the whole map he had to find me. He was Reese Kingsley, heir to Kingsley Aerotech, a company his family had built over 3 generations, a name that opened every door in the country except, apparently, the one he actually wanted opened. He started looking. Quietly, at first, then with investigators. Year after year, dead end after dead end. Meanwhile, I was building a life I was proud of, even on the hardest days. I worked nights doing freelance illustration between feedings. I finished my degree online, a semester behind, then 2. My son, I named him Finn, took his first steps in a kitchen with a water stain shaped like Florida on the ceiling, and I clapped like it was the Olympics. There was one night, maybe 2 years in, when I saw a billboard on the highway, Kingsley Aerotech, some sleek ad for a new aircraft, and something in my chest went tight. I actually pulled over. I sat there with my hand on my phone for 10 minutes, and then I didn't call. I told myself it had been too long, that he probably didn't even remember my name, that I wasn't going to hand my son over to a stranger with more money than sense. I think about that decision more than almost any other one I've made. His sister, Odette, finally asked him outright, one Thanksgiving, why he kept doing this to himself. Why a man who could have anyone was still chasing a ghost from one night 5 years ago. He told her the truth. That night was the only time in his entire life someone had wanted him and not what came with him. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was looking for the one person who'd ever made him feel like just a man, not an asset. By the time Finn turned 5, I was engaged to Garrett Doyle. Garrett was steady. Garrett was kind. In the small, everyday ways. He remembered Finn's snack allergies. He showed up to things. I want to be fair to him in this story, because it would be easy to make him a monster, and he wasn't. Not entirely. He was just a man who eventually got tired of feeling like he was competing with someone he'd never even met. A ghost I never talked about. A father-shaped silence in our house that Finn sometimes asked about and I never had an answer for. I told myself the engagement was stability. I told myself electricity was for 22-year-olds in hotel bars, not for grown women raising sons. Looking back, I saw the signs and didn't let myself look directly at them. A phone he started keeping face down. A dinner with the guys that got canceled and rescheduled and canceled again. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a lot of things that spring. On his end, his father, Bram, had decided it was time. An arranged match, a merger dressed up as a marriage, a woman from another shipping family who'd look right in photographs. For the first time in his entire life, Reese said no. Not let me think about it, no. That same week, Odette found something the investigators hadn't. A photo, posted by a wedding vendor, tagged with a small town 2 states over. A woman with my laugh in the background of someone else's engagement shoot. I didn't know this until much later either. The night before my wedding, Reese drove to that town, not to stop anything, he told me, just to see if it was really me. And that's when he found Garrett, with someone else. Not staged, not convenient, just true, and ugly, and exactly what it looked like. He told me afterward that he almost didn't say anything, that some part of him thought it wasn't his place. But then he thought about Finn calling another man dad for the rest of his life, and he decided I at least deserved to know the truth before I said I do to it. The veil. Garrett's hand in mine, still warm, still a stranger's hand in a way I hadn't let myself admit yet. Reese didn't storm down the aisle. He didn't yell. He walked halfway, stopped, and just looked at me, like he was giving me the choice to ask him to leave, and hoping with everything he had that I wouldn't. "I'm not here to ruin your day," he said, quiet enough that only the front rows really heard it. "I'm here because my son deserves to know his father exists, and you deserve to know the truth before you marry it." He didn't announce Garrett's affair to 300 guests. He walked over, put an envelope in my hand, and said it was mine to do whatever I wanted with. Photos, texts, enough. He'd found it protecting Finn, not to humiliate me in front of people I'd known my whole life. I opened it right there. I wish I could tell you I didn't. My hands were shaking so hard the photos blurred. Here's the part people don't expect. I didn't run into Reese's arms. I didn't feel saved. I felt furious. At Garrett, obviously, but at Reese too, in a way that surprised me. Furious that he'd waited 5 years and picked this day to show up. Furious that my son's existence had just been announced to half our hometown without anyone asking me first. Furious, underneath all of it, that some small, stubborn part of me was relieved to see him. I took Finn's hand. I walked out of that church alone, still in my wedding dress, and I didn't look back to see which of them followed. Reese didn't show up at my door with flowers the next day. He didn't send lawyers threatening custody either, which, honestly, I'd braced myself for. Instead, I got a formal, careful letter asking for supervised time with Finn, on my schedule, on my terms. It was the least romantic thing he could have done, and it was exactly the right thing to do. Finn liked him before I let myself. Turns out my son had been drawing airplanes his whole life without either of us understanding why. The conversation that mattered most between us didn't happen in a hotel room or a church. It happened on a park bench, both of us sober, both of us tired. He admitted he let his family's expectations almost cost him everything, twice. I admitted I saw that billboard 2 years in and drove away instead of calling. Neither of us apologized for the last 5 years like it would undo them. We just finally told each other the truth. Eventually, he brought us to meet Bram, not as a triumphant reveal, as a stand. "This is my family," Reese told him, "whether you approve or not." I expected coldness. What I got instead was a 5-year-old asking Bram bluntly why he had so many airplane models if he didn't even know how to fly one, and something in that old man's face actually cracked. I didn't fall for Reese twice the way I did the first time, fast, reckless, one perfect night. This time it was slower, a key to pick Finn up from school that I didn't hand over for months, a Tuesday dinner that became a habit before either of us called it one. The day Finn called him Dad for the first time, unprompted, Reese had to leave the room for a minute. I let him have that. My illustrated book got published last spring. The dedication page says, "To the boy who taught me how to want more." We have dinner most Sundays now. Me, Reese, Finn, sometimes Odette, once even Bram, looking distinctly uncomfortable and staying anyway. So, what does a man do when he spends 5 years looking for a woman who doesn't even know his last name? He keeps looking, and he learns, slowly, how to be worth finding. What happens when a 5-year-old boy has his father's exact eyes? Eventually, he gets to grow up looking into them across a dinner table instead of a church aisle. And what happens when "I do" turns into "I can't"? Sometimes, it turns into something truer, a lot more slowly, and a lot more honestly than any wedding ever could have.